Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Federation Hall. My name's David Sequeira, and I'm the director of the Fiona and Sydney Meyer Gallery, and also the person who has the privilege of putting together the VCA's series of Art Forum. And before I introduce our guest speaker, I invite you all to join me in grounding yourself in the deep knowledge that before the VCA was thought of, before the University of Melbourne was considered, that for generations, the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation practiced the arts here. They made paintings and sculptures, they shared stories, they danced, they sang songs, and those traditions and rituals continue today. And it really is with joy and honour that we acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. To our guest speaker today, Nadine Christensen. At the core of Nadine Christensen's work is a deep commitment to painting and a consideration of its complex legacy and enduring nature. Constantly re-evaluating the medium and pushing its spatial and perceptual limits, Nadine experiments with the physicality of paint and the endless ways that it can be applied. Nadine's paintings chart a perpetual motion through art and life as she negotiates her immediate environment: studio, home, neighbourhood, work, and back again, gathering objects and ideas. Nadine is a graduate of the VCA, and she also teaches here in the painting department. The exhibition, Nadine Christensen Around, is currently on show at Buxton Contemporary. It's the first major survey of Nadine's work, and a big shout out to Samantha Compt and any other members of museums and collections. Samantha's the person who curated the exhibition. Congratulations to you as well. And a big shout out to our colleagues in museums and collections. Wherever you are in Zoom land or in Federation Hall, please join me in making Nadine Christensen very, very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David, and thanks everyone for coming along today. I'm actually going to read something today, so I hope I won't be too monotone, and I'm sorry to have to read, but this is the occasion for it. Lately, after having put up a survey show, as David said, at Buxton Contemporary, I've been thinking a lot about editing and the role it plays in those big questions that hover around an art practice. Working on this exhibition gave me the opportunity to make new work, but also to look back through about 25 years of practice, an amazing opportunity that I'm super grateful for, but also a daunting task, you can imagine. And a process that in many ways is centred around editing. I'd like to talk about that process and some of the forms of editing that go on in a practice and in making an exhibition like this. And also reflect a little on what's left out, the offcuts, the leftovers, the other behind the scenes interests that have persisted over time. I'm sure you know that thing that, you know, when you start thinking about something in particular around and the world reflects that thing back to you, things line up, you start to see and hear the idea everywhere in different ways. It keeps popping up. The idea of editing's been like that for me over the last couple of months. When an idea or observation gathers momentum like this and accumulates, it's like a fatberg building up in the sewer. This massive non-biodegradable waste matter that gets flushed down toilets and drains, combining, gelling together, growing in size until it's too hard to ignore and blocks the flow. Like a fatberg, sometimes our growing obsessive ideas become too hard to ignore and something has to be done. You might take it to the studio, start making notes. The fatberg analogy makes me think of one of my favourite George Perec phrases when he asks, "What's underneath your experience?" It's a question I roll out to students all the time to encourage them to slow down and look. Perec, a French writer, here he is with his cats, was working in the 1960s and 70s and has been an important touchstone in my practice for many years. A lot of us read his book, Avoid, at art school. It's written entirely without the letter E. This is a playful edit, perhaps arbitrary at first, and then it's in its execution, beautiful and uncomfortable. With this question about the underneath of experience, Perec was getting at the infraordinary. Infraordinary is a term he coined to describe the unnoticed, unregistered things in life, what's underneath or seen to be inferior, perhaps. He described his work as an anthropology that is yet to differentiate between the significant and insignificant. The journalist Daniel Browning, here he is, receiving the Premier's Literary Award this year, had a personal take on this when we were chatting about Perec in my studio recently and about his own research into transgenerational memory for First Nations people and the way lives can be shaped and informed by what we can't really see. Daniel talked about the importance of knowing where things come from, and for him, that so much of what First Nations ancestors said and thought can prescribe what the next generations say and think, whether conscious or not. I love Daniel's interpretation of that. For me, Perec's work was hard. Sorry, I love Daniel's interpretation of that. For me, Perec's work was to notice and reveal the multitude of unconscious or underneath things and consider how they affect our lives, resonate and repeat. Which brings me back to the fatberg in our sewers. It's literally underneath our feet, growing and made from what we shed and dispose of, wet wipes, body oils. It's the infraordinary, transformed into something quite spectacular or grotesque. Perec, who loathed the spectacle, would turn in his grave. Anyway, editing's been a bit like that for me lately. Let me give you a few examples. Recently, I read the biographical novel Wifedom. Mrs. Orwell, it's called Wifedom, Mrs. Orwell's Invisible Life. It's by Anna Funda, a Melbourne-based author. In it, Eileen Blair, who was the real-life wife of the famous author George Orwell, says, "A good thing is only good after its edit." The author has Blair justifying staying with Orwell because when she slices away all his very bad behaviour, there's a kernel of good stuff inside that's worth hanging around for. And here's the two of them photoshopped together. Over summer in early January, I was at the pool one day and eavesdropping on people lounging around towels next to me. They were bringing in the new year by going through a 2024 what's hot and what's not list. I overheard that bar stool seating in restaurants and situationships were out. Ricotta cheese out, labna in. Consumer confidence out, consumer obstinance in. Disco silver out, basic brown in. It was fun to listen to. The clarity was so satisfying, a year and a way forward distilled into a list. The beginning of a new year attracts an acute editing energy, the opportunity to clear your plate and make firmer decisions, do a hard edit. I was going through an overburdened hard drive, dragging things into the trash this January and clearing out the kids' bedroom, trying to declutter, make space and get ready for a new school year. And doing a bit of that. I couldn't help thinking about Marie Kondo. Here she is, the Japanese professional organiser and uber declutterer. I was amused by her so-called backflip on tidy recently. Do you remember? Yeah. After having children, she had a new understanding and acceptance of chaos and saw the value and necessity of relinquishing control. In a way, a survey exhibition can be an opportunity to do the same. I mean, you really want it to be hit after hit, no dead wood in the show. But the question that this raises is who's the best judge of what a hit is and who's the best judge of what dead wood is? It's not always you. And this is something that Samantha Compt and I grappled with and had to confront in putting the show together. In every studio, there's already a lot of self-editing. And you can see here in this slide, a moment in the studio last year, and there's painting in there that didn't make the cut. There's decisions on paintings like that terrible pink that were mistakes. Closely related to the edit, but not quite the same, is restraint. What restraint and editing have in common is that they apply a new condition to the existing situation, and usually there's some kind of removal of parts, cutting. Investigating the creative possibilities of restraint often comes into my teaching practice. Restraint is something that can be done to you or something that you can do to your work. Helping students to get clarity or find something through restraint can be a very generative exercise. And don't get me started on erasure. It's at fever pitch and probably in neurotic proportions in my painting practice. I spend more time deleting than I do applying. Painting really lends itself to erasure, but art in general does, I think. In Eleanor Ferrante's trilogy of novels, My Brilliant Friend, the protagonist, Lenu, says her favourite part of the keyboard is the delete key. And at one point she deletes an entire novel that she's slaved over. Erasing things, of course, can escalate into self-sabotage. In most of my work, you can't see the erasure, but sometimes I've tried out reforming the deleted parts into a heraldry of its own. And in other paintings, erased elements become like a swarm of entanglement, like this, so that you can't work out which network of lines is the priority. In an effort to eliminate the focal point, you make a focal point. Editing can also be saying no. Conditioned from girlhood to keep the peace. I'm one of the many who find it hard to say no. But saying no is a great way to cut things out and keep things relevant at work, in the studio, and at home. A few weeks ago, I was driving in the car and listening to the radio, and a reporter told this story about a writer who, on receiving an invitation to participate in a project from a major publisher, wrote back with a very straightforward email that just said, "No, I don't want to." I thought this was amazing. No niceties, no excuses, no rationale, just a gut feeling. I don't want to. The idea of refusal was big in the art world for a while. And maybe at its peak in 2016, Martin Herbert wrote this book. Tell them I said no. Everyone seemed to be reading it at the time. But nothing much changed from what I could see. In fact, the precarity of an artistic life seemed to get worse, and it became harder to say no or withdraw and maintain a practice. As artists with insecure work and thin on-the-ground opportunities, it's hard to say no. But when you do, it's exhilarating and empowering. Last time I was asked to do this art forum, for example, I said no. It felt good. I wasn't ready. But actually, with this show at Buxton, yeah, here I am. There was always a discussion around decisions, wasn't there, Sam? Lots of to and fro between Sam, but also many others and myself. Rarely any hard lines. Decisions mostly made through some kind of discussion. Of course, sometimes it's not a conscious no, but a forced one. For example, after my Buxton show opened, I had a long to-do list that included all the stuff in life that I hadn't been able to get to, like servicing the car, as well as all the ideas in the studio I wanted to get to that were percolating and spinning off the big push towards the show. But I couldn't attend to any of these because right after the show opened, as someone put it, I fell in a heap. Flu, bronchitis, then pneumonia. Getting sick after a big show is not uncommon. The body gives you a hard no. Other kinds of life stuff or external things can force a no to you and to your studio practice. Sick kids, big debt, ailing parents, falling in love, harsh critics. And they can be hugely frustrating, but sometimes a blessing in disguise. To have a break means you can continue again. This is a detail of a painting a photocopy of a painting that I have up in my studio. Fighting. In putting this exhibition together, we had to be able to say no, but sometimes the editing was done for us, a forced no in various ways. Some collectors decided they wouldn't lend the work to us. Sometimes works couldn't be found, lost somewhere. Sometimes the older works were so damaged they couldn't be shown, scratched, crushed corners, splatters and stains that couldn't be removed from the surface. For us, this posed bigger questions. The patina of living with art, or the condition and effect on works that have been stored or dragged around from studio to studio for a long time, could have been brought to the forefront of the show as an idea or question. How much is too much damage? We live in such highly edited lives. So much of our experience is shaped for us as we sit in algorithm-generated bubbles, that I also think about how thrilling and beautifully absent-minded and unedited experience can be, like the endless scroll of YouTube shorts, waiting at the train or bus station. Not editing puts us into the space of distraction, tangents, which are a delight and which I'm really interested in and can also shape the work, like when you get into a non-thinking zone when you're actually making the work. As well as all the works we couldn't find, damaged works, or works collectors wouldn't lend. Some of the other things that were left out of the Buxton show are curated shows like this one, other people's work, drawing, printmaking, collages, photography, unsuccessful work, source material and backstories, and conversations with peers, students, neighbours. In a lot of ways, the exhibition is a highly edited version of my practice. A museum survey show will necessarily edit out and highlight certain things, as well as the selection and placement of works. The comms around the show are highly edited. We've come to expect that the marketing of an exhibition requires such neat and succinct packaging. This was an interesting process to watch my practice go through, and sometimes an awkward and uncomfortable one for me. Maybe because some edits have to be so massive, and the little bite that the practice is distilled into can feel too tight, neatly packaged, too easily digested, missing associations, context layers, mistakes and processes, glossing over the gaps. Of course, in putting the exhibition together, I wanted to put my best foot forward, but I also wanted to use the edit in a way that opens the work up and shifts the viewer around. You're, I'm sure, familiar with Abby Warburg's term, thinking space, the intervals between images that instigate new spaces for thinking and interpretation. Gaps or edits are super important. There are the visible gaps and the invisible gaps in this exhibition, spaces between works and groups of works in the exhibition design, spaces between sculpture and painting, the big gaps in the years between works being made. Here, for example, we've got something made in 1999 next to something made in 2023. Spaces between the upstairs and the downstairs of the museum, spaces between the foreground and the background in individual paintings, a lost middle ground in composition. When I was applying for a Creative Australia grant to help me make the show, I quoted British academic and theorist Irit Rogoff in my application. who writes of a meaning that takes place as events unfold, like it happens in the space. I'll go back. Right there as you're moving around. That's the kind of show I like, where, as Abby Warburg says, there's an associative network of relations emerging between the works. And in a way, the edits are the thinking spaces, the edits are the gaps. For my show Mixed Feelings that Sarah Scout presents in 2022, I talked about offcuts at an artist talk. I said, another title for this show could be Offcuts. Offcuts are generally considered leftovers, second rate, but I don't think they are. Offcuts have a resonance or a trace of the main thing, but are also something else entirely. As a contextualising or supporting shape, they can open up a new way of looking at the main event or be an event in themselves, unspoiled by intention. The paintings in Mixed Feelings were made alongside larger bodies of work in the studio. They're kind of adjacent to the main flow of the studio practice. They are small because I wanted them to be in the zone of testing and sampling. They typically started off with leftover materials that I didn't want to waste, paint, tape, render. They also utilised source material like collected phrases that I felt very serious about and had been holding on to tightly in the studio for a long time, but didn't know how to use. In her yellow notebook, edited diary entries from 1978 to 1987, Helen Garner wrote, "All my ideas are small and the best I can do is cobble them together." Mixed Feelings was like that. And so is every work I make, really. And actually, so is every show I make. Thinking of the way American painter and writer Amy Silman describes artists and their processes as churning the world makes me feel better when I'm just muddling through, feeling a bit lost, or feeling that my ideas are just too tiny and dull. Churning the world, literally agitating the milk for long enough to make butter. Just keep on moving. Keep those things that you pick up cycling through and see what happens. Whoops, I've gone ahead. We'll just hover here for a bit. Rosemary Ford put me onto an interview between authors Olga Tokarczuk and Deborah Levy the other week, after we both had read Tokarczuk's book, Drive Your Plows Over the Bones of the Dead. In the interview, Olga Tokarczuk talks about moving around. She remembers hearing of a Russian sect that believes if you keep moving, you'll avoid the devil. That movement and perpetual migration are the only ways to escape from sin. Members of the sect practiced moving both physically and psychologically. I found them. They're called the Dukballs. Here they are here. Tokarczuk brings this idea into her writing and into talking about her book and into her life in motion, moving from country to country, promoting her books. She talks in the interview about the desire to have something to keep when you're on the move all the time. This peripatetic impetus resonates in my own practice, walking from studio to home, to work, to school, around the neighbourhood, collecting or holding on to things as you go. What sticks, what falls away. The edits, the gaps, the fatbergs. Melbourne painter Katrina Dobbs does this moving and churning really well. I'm a big fan of her work, but also the way she works. It's a blur between home, studio, source material, painting that is physical and psychological. Paintings cycle through the spaces at Katrina's place. Starting with the jam-packed garage, then going onto the washing line to be dried, then moving into the bedroom for more painting and sorting, then into the lounge room where they're rested, then back to the garage for more work. Katrina wrote of her painting practice, "The struggle seems inseparable from the process, staring in despair at the stacks of unresolved works which surround you, then the repeated failures, the insanity inherent in making the same mistakes over and over again. In my practice too, one thing leads to another. It can be like a kind of vortex, and for better or worse, you get sucked in. I think of vortexes like springs. They store energy. With a spring, it holds energy under pressure and then releases it. Its energy is both directional and chaotic. Springs are volatile and wobbly. I mean, what a great engineering feat. I've used springs in my work a bit, like here. I love them. They embody kinetic release. And this is a video I remembered last night my son showed me. The guy who made a bike out of springs and it doesn't work. And this is some graffiti in the VCA toilets, the girls' toilets that I took a photo of in 2019. I also love a vortex in popular culture as a graphic or as a narrative device, like in Westerns where characters get sucked into like in Westerns. Here we go. Like in Westerns where characters get sucked into a series of knock-on effects that see them spiralling and getting lost, only to end up back where they started. This film, The Passenger, has also been a big touchstone in my work for a long time. This is a painting by Evie Pagoli. Evie Pagoli's purple spiral painting in the 2020 show at Guzzler, with the tongue-in-cheek title, Recent Tendencies in Women's Painting, was a knockout. Evie talks about spirals in an interview as being emo, paranoid, borderless, retreating. Is being an artist like being in a vortex? In some ways, yes, but it's also a horizontal thing. Simon McGlynn, who I work with here in the painting department, said to me one day when he was talking about the difficulty of being an artist and doing a higher degree research degree simultaneously. It was great, he said, if I remember correctly. Sorry, Simon, if I get this wrong. He said, research is vertical, like burrowing down into an idea, and being an artist is more horizontal. I took that to mean more open to everything, surfing across ideas and experiences, finding a shape. There were many alternative titles and possible titles for this exhibition that we debated, Sam and I, and many others as well, were brought into that conversation and we deliberated over them. This is a working list of some of them that was floating around in my handbag all year last year. Looking back over my practice and trying to account for the vertical and horizontal ideas within it, it's a challenge to distill into one title. You start with a long list, you edit around, you edit. Around, the word, was like a fatberg for me. It was hard to get past. I felt it could allude to the connections, the connections, the underneaths, the leftovers, the absences. The catalogue for the Buxton show is dedicated to our friend and artist, Anton Marin, who passed away while I was working on the show. This is Anton and I at a beach in LA on a hot day. See, we're really dressed for the hot weather there. I was on an Australia Council residency and Anton came to stay for a while. This was typical of Anton. He didn't take the residencies himself, but he would pop in on other people's and contribute, make some work, chat things through. I think of Anton as personifying the title of the show, Around. He was always around. His drawing practice became over time private. But if you considered his social life, his practice, which for another type of artist it could have been, it was public and impactful. As long as I can remember, Anton was contributing to the conversation of art. He was everywhere. asking questions, dancing, giggling, listening, sympathising and being argumentative. It's this kind of a round energy I wanted to try and include in the Buxton show. It's my hope that the beginnings, offcuts, source material, underpainting, mistakes are alluded to in the works themselves and alongside or around the works in the gaps, in the edits, in the shape of the exhibition. Thanks.